Hi, this is Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts. I'm the host of the Marching Roundtable podcast and the creator of MarchingArtsEducation.com. Thanks for being here at our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe so you can see exclusive live interviews, plus excerpts from podcasts, webinars, and interviews from live events. This is really the best way to find out what you might want to go back to our website and see an entire conversation. Thanks for being here. We hope you'll subscribe to our channel. Hey, it's Tim Hinton from Marching Arts Education. I'm here with the wonderful Dr. Mary White. Mary, how are you?
I'm doing good. I guess I should say I'm doing wonderful, Tim.
Well, that is great. I'm glad to hear it. So we're in the middle of the contest season now, here in 2021, and we went into the season thinking we're just so glad to be back. But what's happened is everybody sort of did that thing that always happens. You get caught up in the middle of the stress of trying to make the show work, and you want your kids to do well, and you want your program to do well. And I feel like people have lost that perspective. So you're wonderful at this. Of course, you're what is your title there in Martin County?
So I'm the director of curriculum and instruction.
And
So
you are wonderful at that. And you and I have worked together for countless years creating shows. You're a wonderful color guard and designer. So you have a context that I think is really helpful because you're an educator. You work with educators all the time about these kinds of things. So what do we say to somebody who finds themselves getting caught up and losing that perspective that we all had?
well, I think one of the things, Tim, is did we lose a year and a half? Did we lose a year and a half of musical instruction, competition? Did we lose that time period? You know, what impact did it have on kids? I mean, so we're trying to get where we were 2 years ago. I'm not sure if we can get where we were 2 years ago in a week or 4 weeks. I'm not sure of that. Like, I think,
No, I think, Mary, I think the answer is no. And I think that that's what's wrong
right.
is people want to be right where they were in 2019. And a lot of people, Mary, of course, they had bands that were really on the move and they were doing really well and they had all this momentum. I've talked to band people and drum corps people about this, and it's so frustrating that they sort of they had to stop that. And now I feel like everybody's trying to get it back faster than really we are all capable of.
And I completely agree when we talk about learning loss and all this stuff. Like, people say, what are you going to do about learning loss? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to teach every day. You know what I mean? We're going to come in, we're going to say, good morning, students, and we're going to teach what we have to teach that day, and we're going to take an uphill. I mean, I don't know about you, Tim, but I cannot jump to the top of the hill like in a second. Like, I probably couldn't do it in 10 days either. Like, I have to take a slow and steady progression to where I need to get. And I don't think we are honoring progression. And I feel like we need to honor that.
Well, and I think we need that perspective that we had when we were in the middle of it. We had this perspective that, well, it's going to take some time and our students are going to have to figure out how to be back together and back in school. And like, I had a lot of those conversations, but I think
But
what's happened is we've lost that as we've gotten in the middle of everything.
I think you're right. And I know this sounds really old, what I'm about to say, but we've made some of these references before and jokes before, but this is from an Aesop fable, and it's an old one. Are you ready for it? I think I say this to you all the time. Maybe I don't. Maybe I said to other people all the time, but slow and steady wins the race. Steady good work, high expectations. You cannot teach kindergartners to read in a week. They're not developmentally ready for it. So slow and steady wins the race. They need to learn this before they learn that, before they learn this, before. So I think that's what gets you that uphill climb, is those incremental steps moving forward. I'm not saying lower expectations because kids didn't have in place schooling. No means. Define the expectation. What is the expectation today? We've talked about calendar progressions too. Like, I like to think kind of like the expectation for today, the week, the month, the 3 months, whatever you're going. Like, really, I think naming those progressions for a day, a week, a month, 2 months, Like naming those goals, naming those expectations for you, for the kids. I think that's one way to really think about steady progress. And then you can go back and say, okay, here's what we wanted to do today. Did we do it? Yes or no? Here's what we wanted to get accomplished in a week. Did we do it? Yes or no? Like, and then if the monitoring of that, like if you didn't do that in a week, okay, let's go back. What do we need to do? What are those components that we need to do within that week? Does that make sense, Tim?
It does. I like that a lot. But I also wonder if people have in unrealistic expectations right now. For example, almost every band director that I know has said to me, half of my band has never marched before because most programs that I know of did not march last year. So they're saying my sophomores and my freshmen are brand new. So we can't expect our band to be able to do what it did in 2019 if half the band is having their first season and they're coming out of this sort of traumatic thing. But I feel like, again, band directors are like, I want my band to be where I want it to be. And I just think that's unrealistic.
Right. And how do you get rooted in reality? How do you get rooted in reality? I think by naming it, like naming it a little bit. I got an email the other day. I'm judging in November somewhere. And within the email, the person who was setting up the thing said, the event, excuse me, said, if you have not been to a marching band rehearsal recently, you might want to go to one of your local marching band rehearsals and check it out. That was to me to say, like, get rooted in reality. I've seen some of that from contest directors and festival holders and things like that. And I think that's one way, again, is to name what's there. I'm not saying make an excuse, but we also had, Tim, tons of kids like not be at rehearsal because they're quarantined or something like that. I mean, we have to name that too and say, okay, we're catching up. We're getting kids caught up, and that takes time.
Right. So how do you help someone who's lost their perspective and wants so desperately for their band to be where it was 2 years ago? Honestly, that's not realistic. And yes, there's all this pressure of competition, but how do we help them regain that perspective, take a deep breath, and step back to where we were earlier in the year, which was, I'm taking care of my kids. So many people said that to me last year. I've realized I'm really taking care of my kids. I'm taking care of my community. I'm thinking about things other than trophies and scores. And people liked that. So now that we're sort of back in that pressure cooker, how do we help people sort of step back and go, well, am I taking care of my kids right now? Or am I putting them in a situation where I'm making them feel like they're failing because I'm asking more than maybe is realistic?
Right. I think exactly what you just said, like constantly getting those reality checks that you're talking about. Like you said, wait a minute, I took care of my kids. My kids are being taken care of. I'm giving them good instruction every day. And I like this backward mapping or backward planning. Where do we want to be? What's the realistic for the end of the season? And then backward map that all the way through that calendar planning, like I'm talking about, those goals all the way backwards. And I think beginning with the end in mind, it sounds kind of cliche, but Stephen Covey said it, begin with the end of the mind. What do you want? Well, we want to win state contests. Well, that's probably not realistic here. So what do we want? We want our kids to be taught well. We want our kids to be able to march and, whatever show, like name some goals as a staff and then backward map it. I mean, that's what I'm thinking of, Tim. I mean, what are you thinking of?
I'm thinking that that's true, but I also think the thing I also want to remind people of is that this whole experience we've all just been through with the shutdown and disruptions has not been equal across the board. I mean, there have been some communities that sort of had band last year, and there were others that never saw their students at school one day the whole time. And so, as we've discussed on other conversations about having a season of grace this fall, I want to remind people, like, you don't know what any other band that shows up at a contest or in a performance, you don't know what their situation has been. And we have to have a sense of grace of giving them the benefit of the doubt. Wow, is that band really struggling this year? Well, maybe they had a complete shutdown. Maybe a whole bunch of their kids have been missing rehearsals. Like, we don't know what people have been up against. And there are other schools that have been almost normal in their situation. Lucky for them. But I just want to remind people we have to have grace with ourselves, our own situations, and with everybody else, because we just don't know what any other band that shows up at a contest has been through, what their community's been through, what they've been able to do. We have to give people the benefit of the doubt that they are doing the best they can with where they are right now. And I think my point, Mary, is I want directors to say this to themselves and their staff, like, are we doing the best right now that we can with what happened to us, what our community's been through, what our students are prepared for, and then keep that in mind rather than, again, trying to rush back to that place they were that they're not ready to get back to yet.
Right. They're not ready to get back. And when you force something, Tim, does it ever work well?
Never.
It
Never.
just,
And you actually put people at risk. You actually
yes.
put kids at risk. They could be injured. They could all quit because they're not enjoying it. Like, we have to remember this big picture. This is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I'm worried about people who are trying to sort of rush something and force something that maybe their students, their community, their situation is just not ready for.
We've had great loss, and I'm not making excuses, but many students or teachers have lost family members, or there's been loss of instructional time, loss of good teaching, loss of face-to-face teaching. There's been loss. So getting back to that, like, we have to recover that. And I think it's slow and steady wins the race, like really realistic expectations about teaching your kids well. I would love for people to teach well. I mean, I would just like people to focus every single day on teaching the kids the best they can.
Well, and
Yeah,
Mary, when I have conversations with really top programs, that's what they always talk about. Are we better today than we were yesterday? They don't worry about what other bands are scoring. They don't worry about anybody else. Marching band is all offense, right? It's no defense. It's all what can you do? So if we can get people to remind themselves, are we better than we were yesterday? Are we moving the direction we want to go? And not worry so much about where you wish you were going to end up, because that's really out of our control, especially this year.
it's also anxiety producing, Tim. It's also anxiety. So we might have to recognize some of that too.
Right. And we're all sort of on edge and not necessarily at our best because of what we've all been through. So we have to have that grace with ourselves. I'm wondering, Mary, like, is there some strategy we could suggest? Like, could somebody have a member of their team, their instructional team or their band family or something that's like the let's all take a breath
Yeah,
shot, you
put people
know?
in check. Yeah. And sometimes I have served in that role. I'm just being honest with you. Like, let's stop and take a breath, or let's separate from each other, or let's why don't we focus on having a little fun first, or even fun with kids? Like, let's take 10 minutes and play musical flags or something, like, and then that can help reset us, like, to go forward. So I listen to this story. I listen to this story secondhand. So I'm going to say it as I'm interpreting it. I was at a conference in Fort Lauderdale yesterday, and the person who was speaking said she had listened to, I wanted to say it was like an Oprah podcast or something like that. And she had spoken about this woman who had lost function of her left side or something like that. And she had to put a sign outside the hospital room that said, "You are responsible for the energy you bring." And because she was very attuned to what people were bringing her, people's energy. She was very in tune with it because she had lost some function. So it's such a good reminder. You are responsible. And I'm probably misquoting it. If I'm misquoting someone else, I'm paraphrasing, for the energy you bring. And doesn't that make sense? Like, when you're like, oh my gosh, we have to, what do you mean you can't stop on count eight? Like, you have to stop on count eight. Wait a minute. Slow that right down. You're responsible for that too. Like, kids, we're going to stop on count eight. Okay. Let's try it again. And it may take a couple of times, but you're the adult.
Yeah.
So when you give that kind of energy, like, I think that kids will feed off that energy too. Like, when you're like Slow and steady wins the race, kids. My expectation is high. I'm going to get you there by my good instruction, your good learning, your good participation, your good energy. I just think it creates a better feeling all around.
Well, it does. And I think that the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I want people to have this conversation with their team, with the people around them. I think instructional teams, a band director and his staff, a guard staff, whatever, they need to be talking about this. Hey, everybody, let's work together to remember what we've been through, to figure out how we can take care of each other. Let's have grace with each other. Like, I think people need to be having this conversation because it's just any normal year. It's very easy at this point in the season to get all caught up in it. So I'm not blaming people. I've been there. I know exactly how that is. But this year especially, I think we need to have some mechanisms in place to all be able to go, wait a minute, let's stop and breathe. Do we want to bring this sort of tension out to our students at rehearsal?
Tim, I got to tell you something. Yes, I agree for it this year, but I agreed with it 5 years ago too.
Of
And
course.
10 years in the future, like good instruction,
Yes.
good instruction is good instruction. And
You know, it reminds me, Mary, you and I do a lot of band clinics together where we've worked on shows and we'll go in and work with the band. And we did that this year again, even under the circumstances. And I often tell people that I often find myself standing in front of a band director or his staff and saying, you know, this is supposed to be fun. You know, we're putting on a show, everybody, like this, because I think it's so easy it gets so serious and we want it to be so good. And there's all this like pressure for outcomes. And I often find myself as the visitor walking onto a field and saying, let's take a breath, everybody. This is supposed to be fun. We're putting on a show.
so maybe that's kind of a strategy too, Tim, is to have like get a friend to call, like phone a friend, phone an expert, phone Tim Hinton, of course. I'm always saying that, but um, phone a friend, like put me in perspective, Tim, or put me in perspective, my friend or fellow band director across the town. Like, let's put each other in perspective, like kind of like critical friends, but
Well, I
well-meaning,
have friends that do that for
lovely,
me, Mary. I'm sorry, what?
well-meaning and lovely critical friends, I'm saying.
Of course, but I have friends who do that for me. Like I have certain friends that I've known for such a long time, and I will call them up and go, "This happened, and this is how I'm feeling," and and they'll like help me. Like sometimes they'll go like, "Oh, wait, no, you're way off on this," and we figure out like how did that happen. You know, so it's good to have somebody you can check in, and I think that's what I want people to have. Is I want everybody to sort of create a strategy with your family, your team, whoever you're working with, your band family, and say like, okay, let's keep reminding ourselves slow and steady wins the race. We're not going to get back where we were right away. You know what, we might not make state this year, but that is not the end of the world because we have gotten back, like get back that perspective of we're doing it again. I'm so happy to be here. My kids are so happy to be together. Like there was a while there where we were all really right with that. I'm so
Yes.
glad to see my students again. They're so happy to be back there together and making music. Remember that first time, everybody, I've heard this story 1,000 times. The first time you got back together with your group and you started playing that first concert F, whatever, and people were teary-eyed. It was like emotional. Remember that when you're in the middle of all the stress of the season and go, no, wait a minute, it wasn't that long ago that I was tearing up because we were just playing a note together.
And isn't that what's important? Like, that's good, warm feeling and instruction. And you were just glad to be teaching in front of kids again. Let's
Right.
remember it. I love that. I love it.
And
I
that's
mean,
what I'm talking about. Let's keep that. Let's find a way to keep that perspective. Keep reminding ourselves. Take that step back. Take a breath. That's what I want to remind people through this conversation, Mary, because I'm concerned for some people because I see them getting in the thick of it. I see them going down that rabbit hole, and I've been there in my life before. And so I was glad that I had people around me that said, like, wait a minute, this isn't life or death. If that clarinet doesn't make that set, it's not the end of the world. Like, is that clarinet player better than they were last week? Well, yes, they are. Well, okay. Like that's very helpful.
and this is a small community. Like, we think we're the pageantry world and the marching band. It's a small community. We can say that to each other, and we need to say that to each other. And it's okay to talk to your band director friends, like in your associations or your community or in the 5 high schools in your district, and kind of like kind of get that community going about, let's keep this in perspective. We are teaching in front of kids. We have kids on the field. We are doing a show. It's fun. We are making progress every day. And I am giving my best instruction. I, I'm
And
good.
it's not realistic to expect in 2 months' time to zoom all the way back to where, like, that's just not the way this works. And that's probably not healthy for our students.
Right. No, I agree. Like, and when our kids are learning well, I mean, that's what's healthy for our kids when they're making progress and meeting goals.
And when I'm happy and centered and,
Calm.
present and, bringing that right energy that you were just talking about, like, that's my job. And so I have to work on that. I have to exercise, I have to eat right, I have to rest. Like, we talk about all those things that we need to do to bring our best self. We've really got to do that right now. Our students need our best selves to show up and stand in front of them every day. And that
Right.
means not getting wrapped up in expectations that aren't appropriate for the moment.
I love it, Tim.
This has been wonderful, Mary. Thank you for having this conversation. I always love talking about these things with you, and you have such a great history and experience that I appreciate you sharing it.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Tim.